Hi everybody, in this video we're going to learn how to create the typewriter letter effect, and we're going to learn this not by looking at slides and looking at a lot of background information. It's a coding it up video, so it'll be me writing a lot of code. So it'll be you, me, the code editor, and let's get started. The typewriter effect looks a little bit as follows. As you can imagine, it's a case where instead of displaying a word on screen at once, we display each letter of the word in sequence, just like you might imagine you would see with a typewriter. And we have a series of words we want to iterate through. And the way we do that is by playing each letter of the word going in one direction, going forwards, and then deleting each letter of the word, going back to a case where there's nothing displayed, and then shifting over to the next screen. So very similar to like a marquee effect, except instead of having the entire word slide through, we use letters as the things we slide instead. And so what we're going to do now is let's build this thing from scratch. I have a blank page here. I'm in VS Code right now, and you can see that I have a file. It's called Typewriter Effect Video.htm. Absolutely nothing is going on here, and you can see when I refresh the page in my browser, the same page displayed, nothing going on. Now, the first step is to provide the basic boilerplate that you need for having your HTML page just be an HTML page. Visual Studio Code provides a handy shortcut. On a blank HTML document, just use the exclamation sign and hit enter, and the boilerplate content for a typical HTML5 page is displayed. Let's go and change the document to be typewriter effect. Seems appropriate. Let me refresh the page to make sure that's also being displayed here. Yep, this kind of just a way for me as a sanity check to make sure that what I'm displaying in my code editor is the same thing as being displayed on screen right now. Now, there are multiple ways to get started with an effect like this. Some of you may enjoy going through the logic and seeing how can we get the fundamental of the effect built first, and others of you, me included, tend to start by building the basic visuals just so I have a starting point to orient my page and see what it is I'm ultimately going to be manipulating in terms of a visual effect like what we have here. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but I'm going to start by building up the basic UI for our page. So right now it's a blank screen, completely white, nothing going on there. Let's first fix that by giving our background, giving our element and its background a certain set of style, a nice colorful orientation, which is going to be in this case a gold background color. So I'm going to specify style rule, going to be body. The body element's background color is going to be gold. Seems appropriate. Let me hit refresh to make sure this looks good. Yep, so far so good. And we know that the typewriter effect is going to have a text element that's going to be centered on the screen. Instead of jumping back and forth and providing all of that by specifying the element, coming back to the body element, I'm just going to go ahead and specify the centering right now itself. And this is a much easier task these days because with grid, flexbox, centering something vertically and horizontally is almost trivial. So there is a place items approach I can use, but I'm going to keep it slightly more broad and just say justify items, center as well. And lastly, make sure the width of the page is 100. Viewport width, and then height is also going to be 100 VH. My goal is to keep the editing and modification post-production essentially to almost zero. So if you see me making any mistakes, I'm going to do my best to hopefully find it and fix it in real time for you, just so you get a better idea of what it looks like to make a mistake and how to fix it, because oftentimes that's probably one of the most important things about writing code is identifying a mistake and figuring out how to go from a mistake to something that works just fine. So now that we have the body of our page specified, the style for our body element specified, and again, if I refresh the page, nothing's going to happen. So let's go ahead and add the HTML element that's going to be displaying the typewriter, the code, the element, the word. Wow, I cannot speak right now. The HTML element that will be specifying the word we want to apply our typewriter effect to. So it seems appropriate to use a heading element, mostly because it's already a pretty large, bold, in-your-face kind of an element. So we can just have some styling automatically taken care of for us. So I'm going to have some text here, click placeholder. Let me refresh the page and hit refresh. And you can see that placeholder is now displayed on the screen. Let me give it an ID value as well so that I can both style it and eventually use it as a target for my JavaScript as I'm creating this effect. So I'm going to call this element my heading. And since we are still pretty close to having modified some styles earlier, let's go ahead and specify the style for this element right now itself. And so I'm going to specify font family to be sans serif. As you can imagine, I'm not going specific in the styling here because I really want to get very quickly over the initial appearance of the page to start focusing on the logic behind making this all work appropriately. Font weight is going to be bold, not really needed for a heading 1 element, but man, it might be bad. Font size 200 pixels. Now you don't have to use 200 pixels, you can use whatever size you want. I just want it to be really visible for you on the screen as part of recording the video, and I don't feel like zooming in because that just adds some artificialness to what the page actually would look like. Alright, so right now we're in a good spot. We have our page, we have some placeholder text that is currently displayed, and what we want to do now is write some code to make the typewriter effect work the way it does. So as you can imagine, there is no built-in HTML capability for typewriter effect. It's not like marquee, for example, where, well, marquee used to be an element. I think it's deprecated across all the various browsers. So we have to kind of define the logic for all this on our own. And that means we have to go into JavaScript territory. So I'm going to add the script element, and now here's where we're going to be adding all the things needed to make our effect work. So the first thing we want to do is kind of figure out what are the words we want to ultimately display as part of the typewriter effect. And I'm always thinking about some form of food at all times. Not that I'm hungry, I just like to think about food. Mostly the emojis for them are pretty cool. So I'm going to start with a variable, let words. And the words I'm going to specify in the form of an array are pizza, cheeseburger, if I can spell it correctly, and salad. Okay, so these are the 3 words that I ultimately want to cycle through as part of our typewriter effect. Okay, and so, this is the first starting point. And now let's go ahead and start with how are we actually going to make this work. And I'm going to build this up by first thinking about what are some of the fundamental JavaScript concepts needed as part of making each letter appear at a single time. One example or one answer that kind of sticks out in my mind is we need a timer. We need some sort of a function that calls each letter or displays each letter in a fixed interval every certain amount of time. And a great function for that is a timer, and that will be set interval. So what I'm going to create is a function called cycle, function cycle. Okay, and I want to have a set interval function that calls and essentially cycles through all the content through here. So set interval cycle and 200. And just to make sure this all works properly, I'm going to do console.log, and I'm cycling will be the phrase here. And I'm going to bring up the dev tools, bring up the console, and just refresh the page. And yep, you can sort of see here that, let me zoom in a bit, that I'm cycling is being displayed on screen. So at least we know that at this point, our code is reasonably working in that we have a timer, set interval, and every 200 milliseconds, the cycle function is being called. Okay, so what we want to do is first have the cycle function go through each letter of each word. And so we have an array, which means that we need to have some mechanism for being able to specify the count of which word we want to be in. So it would be the first word, second word, third word. So I'm going to create a count variable. I'm going to call it 0. And once we have the actual word we want to display, the next step will be to go through each letter of the word itself. So I'm going to create a variable called letter and have that be 0 as well. So essentially we're creating 2 what are going to be counters to essentially track the part of each item in the array I'm in, and then each letter in the item I'm in from there. And so the first thing I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call this word, and it's going to be words bracket count. And this essentially means that the first word we're going to be dealing with is the result of the words array and the value of count index position. So right now it's words array, count is 0. So it's basically the pizza text that's being displayed right here. And so the next thing is we want to go ahead and cycle through each letter as part of making this work appropriately. And the way I'm going to do this is that if I am not at the end of the word, I want to start each letter and keep going up and building up to the word I ultimately want to go with. So I'm going to create an if statement. If letter is less than word.length. And the letter variable, as we talked about earlier, is an index position for what letter in the word I'm in. And so word is pizza. I'm just going to simplify this right now, just put pizza here so you can think about it. So if the letter value, I'm currently in the index position for the character, is less than the length of all the elements here, that means what I want to do is print a word to the screen. So I'm going to create a variable called word to print. Let me go ahead and do that. Let word to print, we'll initialize this an empty string, and I'm going to specify word to print plus or equals word bracket letter. Okay, and once I do that, I want to increment the value of letter by 1 to make sure that there's nothing shady going on here. Okay, now before we go further, let's make sure that this is actually doing the right thing. So I'm going to do word to print and see what the output's going to be. Let's go and refresh the page. You can see what's being printed on screen. P, PI, PZZ, PI, ZZ, ZZA. Fantastic. So at least we have the right letters being printed, at least from a logic point of view in our code. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and print this to the screen itself. So the console is not a great place to view things, especially for an end user. You might never see the console at all. So I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call this one update text. And this function's ultimate goal will be to essentially take some value and change the heading element's content that we see here. So to do that, I kind of anticipate that we need a DOM reference, or a reference to the DOM element. So let my heading equals document.query selector and call it my heading. Seems straightforward enough. And then I'm going to copy this variable. Update text will be my heading.text content equals the value of text. And the next thing would be to replace console.log with update text, just so that now we're printing it to the screen as opposed to playing it in our console. Let's see what this looks like. All right, so you can now see PIZZA being displayed, and it's doing all the right things here. So we've gone in one direction. We've gone forward. We've started with the word pizza and then started with the first letter, second letter, going all the way up until we finish the full word. For effect to fully work like we intend for it to, I want to go forward, but I also want to go backward as well. Once I reach the end of the full word, I want to go backwards and start deleting the last character up until the point where I have no more words at all. And so we know that this code stops when this if statement essentially hits an endpoint. And so what we need is some kind of a signal, some kind of flag to indicate the direction we're currently looping through, because cycle is going to be called every 200 milliseconds. It doesn't really know or care about where in our loop that we're currently in, or what word we're showing, or what character we're currently showing. So we need to specify that logic and give it that level of intelligence. So I'm going to let direction equals forward. And that's the default section we're in right now. And so what I'm going to say is this: if direction equals forward, do all the logic that you're currently doing right now. Bracket, and let's format this appropriately. All right, if direction equals forward, display the text. And that's correct. Now, what we need to do though is, once we hit a certain destination, we want to update our content to no longer be direction equals forward, but to go backwards as well. And that I'm going to specify right here, because I know that once I hit the end of this if statement becomes false. So this is a good place to say direction equals backward. And this will enter forward and backward. And now what this means is that direction value will hit backward when I reach this part of it. And I can validate that this is the case by running this code. And notice when this console.log gets called. Pizza. And at the end of the pizza, backward got called. Perfect, which is exactly what we want. And so now I'm going to, let me just delete the console.log again. And so if direction equals forward, else. I can do else if direction equals backward just for a more certainty, but in this case we know that the value of direction will either be forward or in this case backward. So then just keep those little things in mind as part of making your code just more robust or more production ready, depending on what you're trying to do. So now this is the part where, if this is the case where moving letters forward, here's where all the logic for moving the letters backwards will come into place. And the way we're going to do that is, instead of starting at the letter and going forward, we're going to go backwards by first checking if my word to print value, which right now is fully fleshed out, word.length is greater than 0, which means that is there even a letter for me to currently deal with? And if that is the case, I want to go ahead and delete the last letter from what I'm doing. And the way we can delete the last letter from a word is by using the slice method. This is a great method you might have used for being able to take a substring of a larger string and print to the screen. And in this case, the substring is going to be everything from the beginning all the way up to the second to last letter, which means we're deleting the last item from it. So word to print is 0 minus 1. And now that we've done that, update text and go ahead and specify word to print as a result. So let's just see what's going on, how it's going to work. Pizza. Word to print is not a function. Ah, perfect, that's right. Word to print that slice. Now let's try again. Pizza. All right, you can see that pizza is displayed and each letter goes away. So we are in a decent spot here where we now have a typewriter effect working for the first word right here. So if we think of a full cycle as being a letter going all the way forward and then going all the way backward, we need a way to detect when that cycle has happened so we can move to the next element in our full words array. So just like before, where we had a signal to indicate when we're no longer going in the forward direction we swap, here we know that a full cycle has been completed. And so I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call something called start over and actually create the function called start over right afterwards. So function start over. And what we're doing in start over is just kind of we want to reset the state, which is going to be a way of just like setting all the variables to 0 and setting a word to print to clear and all that, just a nice thing to do there. But more importantly, I want to move the count value over by 1. There are several ways to do this, but the easiest way is that if my count value is less than words.length minus 1, then increment the value of count. And if that is no longer the case, if I've hit the end of my array, set count equal to 0. And the last thing I want to do next is, actually this is fine. And let's go and define the reset state function just to keep things very, very simple. Reset state. And reset state is going to be letter equals 0. Word to print equals back to its empty state. And more importantly, direction equals forward. Okay, so let's see how this works. If everything works out properly, we get to here, we start over, and the value of word will next be no longer pizza, but it'll be cheeseburger or salad or whatever we're currently going to be displaying. Let's do this. Pizza goes away. Okay, reference error. Forward is not defined. What is forward not defined? Okay, direction equals forward. It's a string and not an actual hard-coded value. I love writing code live. Pizza, cheeseburger, now salad should show S-A-L-A-D, that goes away, and we start with pizza again. So there we have it. We have a full loop of everything we're doing going forward. And notice when I'm refreshing the page, you see the word placeholder appearing for a brief moment, like that. Not a fan of it. Let me go ahead and clear that out so that we're starting with a clean slate here. And so now all these words are going through properly, and I can add more words to it. So let's say I want to put pho as my first item here. If I refresh the page, everything should still work just fine. Now, there are a lot of optimizations you could potentially do. For example, one of the things here that I'm always a big fan of is all of these lines of code can be simplified into just one line by using an approach by using the remainder-based approach. And just to give you an idea what it looks like, I'm going to comment this out. But this also works. Count plus 1 ampersand words.length. So one single line does all of this work. I actually wrote an article on exactly this part right here, where I'm talking about like how to infinitely cycle through items without having to do this kind of magic. And so we can take a look at that separately, and let me set a space there as well. So in the video description, you're going to have a lot more links that go into much greater detail on all these various cases. And so I think that's all there is to it. We can add more doodads and pizzazz to this overall effect, but in terms of the fundamentals of creating the typewriter effect by having each letter be appear individually, and then also have each letter disappear individually as well. I think we pretty much nailed it. So if you have any questions, go to the forums and ask any questions you might have here, and I and others will be happy to help you up. The forums at forum.croup.com. Again, link will be in the description. And a lot of the content you see here, a lot of the fundamental topics around manipulating the DOM or being able to work with various JavaScript techniques is covered in a lot of the books that I've written. A lot of my books are very highly rated or bestsellers in their own little bubble, and so if you want to check all this content out in either paperback or Kindle editions on Amazon or any bookstores available, go to my books link on croup.com. Again, there'll also be linked at the bottom, and take a look at that. And if you don't want to take a look at that, that's cool as well. And of course, hit subscribe to be notified of additional videos that might be coming up that cover similar topics like this. And with that, I will see you all next time.